Welcome to this live show. This is Learn the Tech, show number 19 for August 23 or 23rd, 2016. Learn the Tech is a show where we talk about a subject of technology that is chosen by you, the viewer. So today, this one was chosen by the way, I'm gonna start telling who chose, because some people say, hey, you're not saying who chose the different options. So I will let know who chooses the different options. So the history of Microsoft is chosen by two persons. One is Mark, which is a regular on the Windows channel. And the other one is from, I forget the name, Frank, which is in Florida, that also wanted to know kind of the history of Microsoft. Sorry, Frank, forgot the name. So Mark and Frank, thank you for a suggestion. And anybody that wants to just submit a subject for Learn the Tech, let me know, okay? And we'll just add it. So today, a brief history of Microsoft. I mean, Microsoft is that company that everybody knows. So basically, if you go out on the street, I don't think there's a lot of people that don't know who Microsoft is. Pretty much everybody has a computer or had a computer at some point that had Windows on it. And I mean, Microsoft has dominated really, really a lot in the computer industry. And it is interesting, the history, because Microsoft kind of, there's a bit of luck in what made Microsoft so huge, because it came at a point where technology was changing, and we were having something that is basically kind of a small computer revolution, if you want. So it all starts back in 1975. So here is a very early picture of Bill Gates and Paul Allen. These are the two gurus behind Microsoft. Basically, they are friends from high school, and they're geeks, and they enjoy playing around with electronics, and you know, they find something that's really, really interesting, because back in 1975, there's something that happens, and that something is this, the Altair 8800 computer. This is the first computer. It comes as a kit. It's demonstrated in the Popular Electronics magazine of 1975. And it is actually shared, and they're saying this is a real computer. This can do something. And so basically, that is when Bill Gates and Paul Allen look at this device. They're interested, because they're interested in computers and electronics. It's something that they love. And they're looking at this, and they're like, there must be some kind of way to make this thing more user-friendly, more interesting. And while looking at this, they decide to contact the company that makes this. The name of the company is Micro Instruments Telemetry Service. So sorry, I'm a little sniffly here. The cat jumped on me a little earlier, and sometimes it makes me do a little reaction here. So basically, MITS, or Micro Instruments Telemetry Service, is a company behind Altair, and they get contacted by Paul Allen and Bill Gates. And the reason they get contacted by them, sorry for a second here, is because they have an idea, and the idea is, why not do a basic language, a language so easy that everybody will understand how to program this little box, because it's too complicated. You know, machine language is not easy. People kind of scared because it's too complicated. So they think, hey, maybe if we do a basic language that is easy to understand, people will jump into the computer scene a little easier. So that's the idea that they get here. And basically, they jump on the fact that they actually do a BASIC in 1976. And that year, BASIC from Microsoft is the most popular service, or the most popular thing that Microsoft made ever. It's not yet called Microsoft, but the company that year, thanks to the BASIC for the Altair computer, actually ends the year at making a revenue of $16,000 for the year. So we're in 1976 right now. So that's not a big revenue, but it's something. The company's starting to make money with that, and they're working their way real hard on producing that. But that first BASIC brings a lot of basics. It actually brings a revolution, because as we're getting through that 76 year, 77, 78, 79, 80, a bunch of computers are appearing on the market. There's a Commodore PET, there's the Apple II, there's the Commodore 64 in the early 80s, the Commodore VIC-20, later on Commodore 128. All these computers have basics. And all of these computers, the Apple II, the Commodore 64, the Commodore PET, actually have a BASIC, because here it says Commodore 64 BASIC. And by the way, a lot of you are probably looking at this and saying, oh my God, this reminds me when I was young. I had one of those, and I still have a Commodore 128 here, by the way. So basically, what you see here is BASIC that is done by basically Microsoft. Microsoft created the BASIC for Commodore systems, created the BASIC for the Apple II, and that is a revolution. That is the most popular product that they have at that time, and that's when the name that came up, and Paul Allen is the one that made the name. He calls the company Microsoft, but it has a dash. It's not all in one name like today. It's micro-soft. And so Bill Gates is not hot with the idea of Microsoft. They're like, yeah, okay, we're not sure. We're going to see. And the name, of course, it appears in 1979, because Bill Gates in 1979, while talking about some of the products, actually refers to the company as Microsoft. And basically, that's really where the name Microsoft starts to be used. So it's pretty interesting to know that they are using these types of products, and BASIC is the first thing that they are, of course, licensing across the board on different computers. Now, this is a little something that's going to be the first ever hardware that they make. As they're going through, they're starting to make money thanks to BASIC distributions of different companies. They actually move to a fact that they are doing the first product, which is a Microsoft. Sorry, I'm getting a little mixed up in my notes here. So they make this thing, which is this is for a Z80. It's called the soft card. The soft card is the first card. It fits into an Apple II computer, and it brings Z80 language for CP/M use to the Apple II. Why? Because in 1978, 79, 80, what's the most popular operating system for a long time is CP/M. And CP/M runs on a Z80 processor. So this is the first success for hardware. We're in 1980. And in 1980, somebody that we heard a lot about kind of many years ago is coming to the scene, which is Steve Ballmer. Steve Ballmer will join Microsoft in June of 1980, when this is starting to get popular. Now, they sell 5,000 units of this in 1980, $349 a piece. This is a great success, especially today. You're going to think, well, 5,000, that's like not a lot. Well, think that you're in 1980 and that computers are rather rare. There's not a lot of people having a computer around in 1980. And so selling 5,000 of this soft card that brings the possibility of Z80 on the Apple II is actually pretty impressive. And the reason they're selling it, of course, because there's demand. The CP/M and the Z80 are kind of the computer of the time, so everybody wants to jump on that possibility. So by adding this card, the Apple II becomes a CP/M machine. So it's kind of interesting to see that. So through that time, Microsoft is actually working hard, and they are trying to find other ways of doing things. They partner up with a company called IBM that wants to actually bring to the market the IBM PC. And the IBM PC, which is basically the first ever PC that is on the architecture of, still today, we're still running on the same architecture in 2016 from the original IBM PC, and they need something. So they go to IBM and they say, hey, we've got something for you, a operating system for your machine. And so, of course, IBM is also in negotiations with somebody else, but that negotiation doesn't work. So they go back to Microsoft and they say, okay, we have a deal. Problem is that they don't have a product operating system. They have nothing. And it's a little bit thanks to the fact that IBM didn't do its own work and didn't know at all what Microsoft was about, and that basically it was almost a couple of guys just still barely doing and knowing what they do. They buy 86DOS, which is made from another company. They get the license for 86DOS, and they get it for cheap. They spend a couple of thousand for 86DOS. The company that owns this doesn't think it's worth it much. So Microsoft takes this, and of course this will be transformed into several different versions of what we know as DOS, the disk operating system. Sorry. So the disk operating system is a system that basically helps control and work with PCs, 8086 and so on. It will dominate the 80s for a while because the DOS operating system works on first the IBM PC, which it becomes PC DOS. But as time goes by, and as the fact that clones start to appear, and that IBM didn't really license correctly with Microsoft, meaning Microsoft could sell it to whoever they want by just doing a little modification, means that DOS is becoming a huge operating system. DOS makes Microsoft go into the millions. So in 1983, thanks to the disk operating system, Microsoft now registers $55 million in 1983. Now, in 83, apart from the people that have these IBM PCs, we're still not hearing. Microsoft is not a word, is not something we hear about. And, most people at that time are with, Timex Sinclair or Commodore 64s or, all of these machines, the Ataris and the Coco from Radio Shack and so on. So it's not something that we know a lot about. But, they're slowly going through, and that's where Windows 1 will actually appear. And Windows 1 appears in November of 85. In November of 85, Microsoft opens a new company. Well, Microsoft opens another Microsoft place in Ireland, and that's where they will start working on different projects, including a graphic user interface. They want to bring the PC to something a little easier to use, because DOS, frankly, is kind of difficult, and unless you're really geeky and like those command lines, it's not always cool to use. So Windows 1 is the operating system that appears, and that is November 20th, 1985. They are working also at the same time with a graphical user interface, which is with the IBM PC side. Now, Windows 1 doesn't really take off much because it's still something that most people don't really have, and there's so big of a mix of computers back then. On the IBM PC side, they're working on something called OS2. OS2 promises to transform the IBM PC into something giant. Biggest problem is that Windows and OS2 are kind of together at the same period, and Microsoft lowers the price of Windows to a point where machines running OS2 might not be of interest. And actually, Microsoft at some point removes itself from working with IBM for the OS2, which basically never really takes off, and at some point it disappears because the IBM machines are compatible with Windows, and of course, that's the thing. People slowly are starting to adopt Windows at that time. Other products that appear at that time, Microsoft Works. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't know is that Microsoft Word we're using today for our word processing has actually been done in 1983. The first Word version using today appeared in 1983, but it's not yet anything because at that time there's a lot of mix of stuff. Microsoft Works starts around 1987. Microsoft Works is that suite of software that has a word processor, a spreadsheet, and a database. And it's trying to make its place because WordPerfect in the late 80s, early 90s, that's the thing that everybody uses. So WordPerfect dominates the business, dominates schools. I remember going to school and having to write reports, and I remember back then having WordPerfect in DOS. And that was the operating system basically to use. Microsoft is working on different things. So it's working on Word, but it's also doing Microsoft Works, which is a lower priced version, and they try to include it with a lot of stuff that they can, of course, go through. Of course, WordPerfect, as I was saying, is the domination right then. When we say, yeah, company dominates, it's never going to change, nothing ever will change. WordPerfect is the word processor back then. I mean, we couldn't think of anything else than WordPerfect. So it's kind of interesting to see that even though this is the word processor of the time, slowly Microsoft's own product are taking hold. And the reason they're taking hold also is because they're working more and more with enterprise, which is a big, big market. Of course, Microsoft Word, like I said, it starts in 1983. It's still very small. It's still, a little thing that's going to dominate once again. Lots of the products. If you look at the products from the 80s, Microsoft Word, it's the domination of word processing today. Windows, domination today. Even DOS back in the old days is kind of a domination of an operating system, even then, for the Microsoft Corporation. So they aren't perfect. They do a lot of mistakes. They bring on a lot of products and a lot of software that nobody ever wants. But through the mistakes, they make products that are dominating at some point the market, which is quite amazing. What really, really changes Microsoft and will forever change its course is Windows 3. Windows 3 is the first operating system that finally makes it possible to have a graphic user interface on PCs that works quite well, does a lot of things, has multimedia capabilities. For the first time, people are watching in little Windows videos, stuff like that. Things that were almost unthinkable only a year or two before this comes out. And Windows 3 now comes part of machines. So instead of saying, hey, this is the latest PC with DOS 6 or 5 or 4, This is Windows. We're having a new computer with Windows, and those that have Windows 3.0, it's basically a graphical user interface built upon or on top of the DOS operating system. So you'd start your computer, and if you wanted to be in Windows, you type the win command, W-I-N, for those that remember that. So this is what starts transforming Microsoft and making this operating system basically the central point of all the money that they rack in. So once again, Windows, new version. And this one helps another part of Windows, Microsoft. It's the Windows 3.1. And what's on Windows 3.1 basically is the fact that Windows 3.1 incorporates a new feature, which is basically networking in between the different environments. So computers are connected together. This is the first version that starts to include what we actually call the NT core. The NT core was always more of the business side with Windows. This incorporates the NT core. It becomes one of the most popular versions back then. Of course, with the latest version, the last version they made, which is 3.11, and it was calling themselves, I believe, Workgroup for Windows or something like that. So basically, it had the capabilities of Windows 3, plus it added the connectivity between machines, because for the first time, we start talking about networks, sharing between networks, documents, information, something that is getting more and more interesting here. Of course, one of the things that happens is that there's a big fight between Microsoft and Apple. It lasts 5 years. Apple thinks that Microsoft steals its ideas because Apple, at the time, they already have basically an operating system that is a graphical user interface with Windows, and you use a mouse to go through it. And when Microsoft starts actually publishing its Windows operating system, Apple says, okay, you're copying us. This is ours. Finally, after 5 years, Microsoft wins. The judge, by looking at everything, says, no, they haven't copied you. And there are some things that they're telling Apple is that there are things that are yours that you can say it's mine, but there are things that are general and you cannot say and possess that. And that helps, of course, Microsoft win against Apple back at that moment. So there's other products that show up, Microsoft Encarta. I remember having one of those. I think it was the 2000 version that I had of Microsoft Encarta. And it was a very interesting idea. Why not get a multimedia encyclopedia, incredible holiday price of $99. That's kind of expensive, I would say. So, of course, all of these software are cool for them. Encarta is nice. It's really cool, kind of a computer encyclopedia. And of course, it pushes the Windows operating system. It only works on Windows. So Microsoft actually does this, but does this in thinking, well, people will want Windows because they want to have these products at the same time. So, all sorts of little details like this that Microsoft thinks in the business. Now, Windows 3 is probably really the start of Windows on PCs, and it is very popular. And it is popular to a point where there's a hype happening, and something that we can't imagine today, really. But actually, in 1995, Microsoft will, of course, issue Windows 95. Windows 95, there's lineup at the stores. People are waiting in line at midnight to get a copy of this. So try to think about it. People lining up to buy Windows. It's a little bit like Apple products today. People lining up, waiting for midnight to get their iPhones or their brand new Apple device. It's kind of interesting to see that people are lining up back then to get Windows 95. Now, why is Windows 95 so different? Windows 95 is the first operating system that departs from DOS. Up to Windows 3, basically, the Windows operating system is an overlay of DOS. You run it from DOS, it needs DOS to actually operate, and it, because of that, has limits on what you can do. Windows 95 is the first operating system that doesn't rely on DOS. It's an authentic system that starts by itself. It does include a DOS version inside, but instead of running over DOS, it's a Windows graphical user interface that incorporates a DOS capability. It also adds tons of new things. It adds capabilities of, managing more memory, using faster processors, using new devices more efficiently, like CD-ROMs. It's almost funny when you think about it today, but CD-ROM started working in Windows 3 pretty much. But Windows 95 adds all these capabilities. But the original version of Windows 95 has something missing. Something that actually Bill Gates himself says, I don't see why we should put it in there. And that's where you see that there are a certain number of missteps in here. Bill Gates doesn't think that the internet will be something big. Bill Gates thinks that it's just a small network that's just going to do, a few things. People won't be interested in going there. Why put a browser in Windows 95? Because when they actually have Windows 95 out, they already have a version of Internet Explorer. It exists. It's just that they're just like, I don't see why we should put it in here. But that's one of the things you see, that Bill Gates thinks that the internet back then is not really important. So imagine, that is a big mistake. And of course, people buy this, and it's the best-selling Windows ever at the time. Eventually, they see that this has been a mistake. They issue a pack. It's called the Windows 95 Plus pack, and it adds Internet Explorer into it, something that was missing out. And why? Because now they're starting to see that the internet is not just a little something that's gonna, for geeks. It's getting popular. People are getting interested in the fact that the internet has so much to offer. And with the browsers, the internet becomes a world of multimedia experience that's really cool. So Microsoft jumps here. Back when this happens, the first web browser, Mosaic, gets rapidly thrown away because Netscape is the browser. I remember using Netscape for a few years in the 90s when I was first connected to the internet. And so Internet Explorer comes into the market through Windows 95. It's not through Windows 95, though, that it's going to dominate and kind of push away the Netscape browser. Of course, from then, starting with Internet Explorer and now understanding that the internet is going to be really, really major, they add the MSN network. This is a network where you have a membership, and it gives you access to all sorts of online content, news content, newspaper content, evolved, basically, Microsoft Encarta, if you want, much more information, much more stuff. They are starting to understand one thing, and this is the start of something that today is continuing. They start to understand the web's going to be big. We need to be online. We need to have online stuff. And, MSN network is one of those. They're starting to think of a network, online network of interconnectivity with people. Another thing that's quite popular also, the famous MSN Messenger becomes probably one of the most popular messaging service when this comes out with Windows 98 in that area. Back then there are some messaging service. There's ICQ. I remember using ICQ. There's a few more, but this one will do one thing that the others did not. And the reason is, like Internet Explorer starts to dominate because it's included with Windows, and that people buy machines with Windows that has a browser, they don't understand why they should get another browser. It's still the same war today, by the way. They actually pack in Windows 98 MSN Messenger. So people are like, oh, cool, we can actually talk to each other through this. It's really nice. And not just that, this continues to ensure that people are on the network for Microsoft Online services. It pushes them to get Hotmail accounts. It pushes them to use Microsoft services even more. And that is where you see how brilliant they are thinking about the future from there and why they're dominating everywhere. Windows NT. For a long time, there are two different versions of Windows if you want. We come to a point where there's Windows NT, which is Windows for networks. It's a Windows for business. It's different than the Windows that users have. It's different than today, where today most businesses use the same version of Windows, or sometimes professional versions or enterprise versions, but it's basically the same version of Windows that they have. Back then, business has its own Windows with Windows NT. Windows NT has an interesting new feature also, the way that the core works. It changes how Windows works, and it actually isolates processes. So instead of crashing, Windows 95, it crashes. With Windows NT, they start having a much more solid Windows, something that's very rock solid. When something breaks, it's not all the operating system that's gone, it's just part of it. And they're isolating that in different modules, and it helps make the operating system better. Of course, the second version of Windows that's extremely popular, that one ran for a long time also, Windows 98. Windows 98 follows up on Windows 95. It has an updated browser. It has an updated interface that does resemble a lot Windows 95, but things are tweaked to look a little more modern. It has built-in easy internet connectivity for the first time. Windows 95 does not. Windows 95, when it comes out, because of the internet they think the internet's not something very popular, it's difficult to connect to the internet from time to time, depending on the internet service you have. And it doesn't work always well. Windows 98 is the first operating system where the internet is central part of the operating system. And they actually have all sorts of internet things, including the MSN network and Messenger and everything. Windows 98 centers itself around, we are not just an operating system for your PC, but we're an operating system that will also connect to the world. And so this is, of course, appears in 1998, and it is very popular because it's a follow-up to Windows 95. A lot of people like it. They move and jump on the bandwagon. Windows Millennium, that one, we hate it. Windows 98, is pretty much a big bunch of it is the core of Windows 95, updated with new features, but centered around the internet. They want to have something that has a little more of the internet, but also that has new technology. Windows 98, for example, they're not thinking of anything like that at the time. When it's released, thumb drives or external hard drives, that's not something that we're thinking about. But they do appear at some point, and you need drivers, and they become common enough that this side, well, we'll add a few things. So Windows Millennium adds some new capabilities, recognizing USB thumb drives, using external hard drives, stuff like that. But there's a big problem with this Windows Millennium. It is a horrible and stability. It crashes like crazy. I remember when I went to Windows Millennium, I was kind of the geek that wanted to have the latest Windows. So I remember I have this computer that I bought in '99. I remember buying it and paying $2,700 for it. Amazing. It runs on Windows 98. Come the year 2000 around, a little before, Windows Millennium. I'm like, hey, this is cool. I'm going to go buy myself a copy of Windows Millennium for Christmas. It's going to be the cool operating system. And I install it, and immediately I start running into problems. Not just that. Every time you install it, it doesn't even install in the same way. It's like totally unstable. It's a major problem. Microsoft, does a big mistake with this one. They wanted to release it too fast, and they didn't test it enough. So a lot of people stay in Windows 98. And basically, Windows 98 becomes the longest operating system in time for that period of time because so many people hear that Millennium is crap. Pretty much everybody wants to stay into Windows 98. And, let's be frank here. Windows 95, Windows 98 aren't exactly totally stable. Crashes do happen quite often. It's pretty surprising. So we're continuing on, and business, once again, has its own version of the operating system, which is Windows 2000. 2000, built on NT technology, is meant for business only. But it does get an adoption rate for regular users also. Why? Because Windows 2000, I was saying a little earlier that Windows NT, the way it was built, made it a little more solid, rock solid when it was being used. Windows 2000 is built on that. And it is actually an amazing operating system. It never crashes. It looks like and is used like Windows 98, but it's actually a totally new core. And that core, of course, is so solid that the enterprise is happy, but a lot of users, a lot of tech enthusiasts say, hey, I want to have that. That never crashes. It is, of course, as everything for the internet and the network, but it has a drawback. Because the core is different, it relies on the fact that if you buy software, if you buy a printer, you'll need to check if it's compatible because this core is not compatible with the core of Windows 98. So if the printer says it's good for Windows 98, doesn't mean it's going to work on Windows 2000. So it does gain a little bit of a following, but not that much because of incompatibilities. Now, in the year late 2001, early 2002, something comes up and it's called Windows XP. Windows XP, people have a short memory span because Windows XP has something that's really interesting. Windows XP is the first operating system where business and users have the same version. Users have Windows XP Home, I believe. And there's Windows XP Professional for the business side. But at the core, it's pretty much the same thing. And except the professional or business version adds features and tools for networking. Windows XP is not loved when it started. I get all the time on the channel, oh man, Windows XP, the best operating system ever existed. That is one hell of a really amazing operating system. Yeah, but go back in that period. Windows XP breaks things. Why? Not because it's not good. It's actually really good because it is built on the same core as Windows 2000. Actually, it's so close that Windows 2000 software and the devices often work in Windows XP. And because it shares the Windows NT core, it's rock solid compared to anything before. And Microsoft wants that because they have just been going crazy with Windows Millennium being a bad operating system. Problem is, people start getting computers with Windows XP, and they start first at looking at the interface, which is different, and they say, wow, this is very different, when in reality isn't that different. But mostly, people start hooking up their Windows 98 printers or their old, devices that they have to find out that it doesn't work here. They have those CDs with their favorite game or favorite software. They put it here, and it doesn't work. So people start, because Windows XP, at the beginning, people start bashing Windows XP and saying it's the worst operating system ever. It doesn't work. Problem is, that's the price that Microsoft had to pay to change its core to go in a new direction. So Windows XP at the beginning, for those that remember really well, is not loved. It's hated by a lot of people. And it also requires a machine that is more powerful. I remember using Windows XP on that same machine that had Windows 98. I moved to Windows Millennium. It was a Pentium 3 600 megahertz, I remember. And it also had, I believe, well, let me just think. It had 64, I believe it's 64 megabytes of memory. Now, we're not talking gigabytes. Today we have gigabytes of RAM. 64 megabytes. Windows XP, when it comes out, technically can run on 32 megs of RAM. Problem is, running Windows XP on a Pentium 3 with 32 megs of RAM is like probably running Windows 10 on a 1 gigabyte machine, and it's even Windows 10 is faster on a 1 gigabyte RAM. It would be like giving it the bare minimum of 512 megs. So you got to upgrade. People that want to have that working need to upgrade their RAM, need to upgrade everything. So it's a big change, but slowly people adopt Windows XP. And Windows XP becomes eventually a very popular operating system. And people love it. It doesn't crash a lot, and it's actually damn good. Now, Microsoft is kind of surfing on a success here, and they're thinking, let's do something else. And they do a project called Longhorn. Longhorn is what's supposed to eventually be the replacement of Windows XP. But the problem is that when they're actually working on Longhorn, it's going bad. They want to do so many new changes in technology that they get kind of lost in it. They want to change the operating system. They don't want to have FAT anymore. They want to do something really interesting. They don't want to have NTFS either. They want to do something really unique, do like a Windows FS operating system for the disk, or file system, sorry. So they want to do so many changes that finally, around 2004, they realize they're going nowhere. And they realize that they need to really, really scrap everything. And because they scrap everything and hurry up to do an operating system from there, it will give another nightmare to Microsoft, Windows Vista. Windows Vista, that famous hated operating system once again. So we're Millennium. People remember Millennium. It's crap. It's bad. It crashes. It's horrible. We get to XP. People at the beginning don't like it, but they start with time to love it and find that it's a good operating system. And then we get Vista. Vista as the start of a new interface, which will be completed in Windows 7. Its problem is that it's a terrible operating system for resources. You need a lot more RAM. You need a powerful machine. Even then, Windows Vista is sluggish in its first installment. You have to wait till Service Pack 1 comes along to make it better. And basically, It's not loved because of many things. It isn't loved because of the change in the interface. It isn't loved because of how sluggish it is. Just doing a change in the operating system, you shut down, takes an enormous amount of time to go through. And basically what happens is that Windows Vista is something that a lot of people don't like. Funny thing though, people hate Windows Vista, but they do an experiment. They take 1,000 people, they pay them to spend a full day trying out an experimental operating system. And these 1,000 people are using something that they like, and the majority say, wow, if that was Vista, I would have loved it. And at the end of the experiment, they say, look, it's Windows Vista. All they did was just change the looks a little bit. They didn't change the interface or anything. They're just changing the looks a little bit, doing a little tweaking here and there. And people are like, oh, really? Which gives you an idea that a lot of the hate and love of an operating system or something like a computer has sometimes to do also with, how the people feel basically with that, how the people live their experience. And a lot of what they hear also. Still, it's not the best of operating systems. So they replace it 2 years after with Windows 7. And Windows 7 is an operating system that has a little bit of difficulty at start because it suffers a little bit the same problems than Windows XP had. Change of the core of Windows means some of the old stuff that works on your XP machine, because let's face it, a lot of the people that go from their old operating system into Windows 7 aren't Vista users for the most part. They're Windows XP users that skipped Vista because they just didn't want it. So they get into Windows 7, my 8-year-old printer doesn't work, my, whatever. My first webcam doesn't work, and so on. And it's because, once again, there's a change in the core of Windows. Still, unified versions is pretty much the same version for business, for users. Windows 7 introduces a number of new technologies and really fixes Vista. And the funny thing is that if you look at the core of Windows 7, it's Windows Vista. Windows 7 has the same core as Vista. Pretty much a lot of stuff that Vista could run, Windows 7 will also. It is very close, but they tweak it. They tweak it so it's a little more efficient. It doesn't, take forever to stop or to start. They make it better. And Windows 7 becomes a very loved edition of Windows. It is still, as we speak now, about 48% of all the computers in the world. So think about it. Half of the computers are running on this operating system, which was created, we're in 2016. We're about, 2008, 2009 when Windows 7 starts, something like that. So it's an amazing operating system. A little more. We're in 2016. 2015, 13, yeah, let's say 2010, 11, Windows 7. So it's an aging operating system. It's really an aging operating system, but it's still used by half of the people that have a computer. Comes Windows 8, another one that people don't like. Windows 8 isn't a bad operating system. If we look at it in a way that is, just strictly, purely at the level of how it is efficient, it performs, and it works, it's actually a good operating system. It's very rock solid. It is faster. It's faster than Windows 7. They tweak a lot of the things, but they make one mistake when they want to do Windows 8. The mistake that they do is they think that we're going to jump on touch devices. Nobody will have a regular computer. We're all going to have touch devices. We're going to touch the screen to do things. And they decide to do a bad move by removing the start button and the start menu that everybody loved in Windows. And that causes a really, really, really big problem. People hate Windows 8. Why? Because they don't understand it. They get to this screen that they just don't like. Some people will say, hey, I hate the tiles. It's ugly. And it's kind of an operating system that basically a lot of people will not like at all. Now, that, of course, gives way to new products like Classic Shell and Start 8 and stuff like that to try to put back a start menu in your operating system, basically. But still, it's not like. But there's one feature, and I still say it today. If you had a touch tablet, if you had a touch device, Windows 8 was the best operating system for a touch device yet. Windows 10 is good, but Windows 8 still has a little edge on touch devices. And I got to say, I really liked that. But unfortunately, Microsoft didn't understand the market. They didn't understand that they could have done Windows 8 differently. Maybe do it with one version that adapts. So if your computer is not a touch, it's start menu, regular desktop. If your computer is a touch, this start screen. Maybe that would have been better. So, of course, they're scrambling up, but there's big changes at Microsoft. Steve Ballmer leaves. And actually, we say he leaves, but he's pushed out, really. Because what happens is Steve Ballmer, during all that period that he is at the top of Microsoft, while Bill Gates is just, on the board of directors, Steve Ballmer is one of the guys that pushes things like this. And basically, a lot of people start to think at Microsoft, maybe he's not the guy for us. Maybe we need somebody better. And that's when things change. That's when Satya Nadella comes in. That's where a big chunk of the Windows team is actually replaced with young people that already, have experience at Microsoft, but have different ideas. And they come out with something that's Windows 10. Windows 10 is the actual operating system. It's something that some people hate, some people like. It's something that I personally like it. It's something that is a Windows 8 like it should have been, maybe. It is back with the start menu, but it still has the the apps and everything. It is the first operating system that actually Microsoft starts listening to users. What do you want in an operating system? It also introduces all sorts of things that people aren't totally sure. Lots of people with, concern for privacy think, wow, this is bad because it sends a lot of telemetry. It introduces Cortana, an assistant. It will, of course, introduce something that a lot of people don't like, the forced upgrades, the forced updates for security. I personally don't think it's bad, but it's something that people wanted to have control over, and they have the impression of losing the control. Windows 10 is the last Windows that they will do. That's what they announced last year. That's still what they're thinking. We are in what is the last version of Windows. Now, that said, it is updated all the time with updates. We just had the anniversary update. And it will continue having updates that will actually add features in the future. It's a living operating system, if you want. But Windows 10 is the future. One of the interesting things that I've heard a few times, and I wouldn't be surprised, is that eventually, maybe this will disappear, Windows 10, the 10. A lot of people have been saying, you know what? At some point, Microsoft is just going to call it Windows. Because if you don't have a new version, why call it, well, have it a number like 10? It's the last version, just call it Windows. And you know what? It's not a bad idea. Windows. And I wouldn't be surprised eventually that's what's going to happen. So starting from here, where is Microsoft going in the future? You know, Microsoft had software that was dominating. They were making money with DOS. They were making money for a long time with, of course, Windows, which was the #1 product for them. But it ain't today. Windows today is the fourth place of how much money it's raking in to Microsoft. It's far from everything else. It gives us an idea that Windows isn't that important anymore for Microsoft. It's not a product that is what dominates their money. Office, dominating today with its Office suite, with Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, OneNote, Access, so on. That is dominating because of the business users. That is one of the major money makers today. So even if they would not produce another Windows, it isn't the problem, because here is where they're making the money. And that's what the future will look like. Things are going to change. Microsoft Azure, cloud services, is the future of Microsoft. It's where it's making the most of its money, delivering services to enterprise for interconnectivity, for things to get better. That's where Microsoft is making the bulk of its money today. That's the #1 money maker. Services to the enterprise, followed by Office. It's there that they are making money. Also, hardware. Microsoft creates a lot of hardware. For a long time, we had mouse, we had keyboards. They're actually good, by the way. Mouse and keyboards from Microsoft are usually good. So they have all sorts of these little products, webcams of all sorts. But now Microsoft is getting more serious in the hardware. It's getting serious in making computers, Surface Pro tablets, Surface Book. That's also something that's kind of interesting. It still works hand in hand with their own services and products like Windows, Office, but they add a side to it. And you know what? It's surprising because like the Surface tablets are extremely popular. So Microsoft is hitting another point here and there. Of course, phones. You know what? The biggest problem that happened, Steve Ballmer didn't want to go into phones. He didn't think it was something that was going to work. Steve Ballmer took a decision that would really, really make things change. He decided that phones were not going to be the thing. And that same year that he decided that, Apple came out with the first iPhone, which became a success story. Still is today, even though it's more relaxed. So when you look at that, you're like, once again, Microsoft is a company of good decisions, bad decisions. But the overall, it's still continuing. It's a multi-million-dollar company. It started off basically, moved to, in 1976, moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, because of the contract for BASIC for the Altair 8800 computer. It then moved into the state of Washington in the early 80s when Steve Ballmer joined. Later, in the early 90s, it then moved to Redmond, where it is still today, there in the state of Washington. And Microsoft is basically really a big company that's looking into the future, and that is going, of course, to continue multiplying all the services online as we look at the future. All the companies that it acquires now are companies that have something to do with connectivity, with artificial intelligence, with really the cloud, with the OneDrive services and everything. So it's going to be interesting to see the future of Microsoft, where we're going, What will happen to Windows in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? It's an amazing company, and of course, people love or hate Microsoft. It's pretty much a love and hate situation. They either love or they either hate, but nobody is indifferent. Nobody is in the middle of I don't really care. It's no, I hate Microsoft or I love Microsoft. That's pretty much where people stand, basically. So this was a quick look. You know what? There's a lot of stuff missing in this outlook of Microsoft because there was just too much information to talk about in all the different products I wanted to bring. But there's tons of other stuff that's super interesting on the intricate details inside Microsoft itself. So this was the Learn the Tech show for today. Next week, we have another subject, and I thought this one, I actually added that one because I thought, let's be fair. If we're going to talk about Microsoft, let's talk about Apple computers. So next week, I'm the one that chose that subject. Let's talk about the history of Apple computers. And Apple computers has something different than Microsoft. Microsoft, pretty much, even though mistakes, is a company that rose all the time. Apple computers is a company that rose and fell. And it's an amazing story. If you enjoy my shows, please subscribe, give us thumbs up. Hope you enjoyed today's show about Microsoft Windows, or Microsoft Corporation, sorry. See you next week. This show is every Tuesdays live, 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 2200 hours UTC. Hope you enjoyed today's show, and see you next week. Of course, you are the one that will give me subjects, so why not write a subject? What do you want to hear about technology that I can devote an hour on? Anything that is about technology, and I mean anything, as long as it's technology. Take care. Have a nice week. See you next week with our live show at 3 p.m. where we answer the questions and learn the tech at 6 p.m. Bye-bye.